Hi friends, Miss S here with your Read Aloud. I hope you guys are having a wonderful Tuesday, and I'm really excited to have you here for the lesson today. So we are going to continue reading our text from yesterday, Stone Soup. Make sure that you are watching the Read Aloud above if you did not read this text with us yesterday. And then not only are we going to be looking at this text, but we are also going to be looking at another familiar text that we read before, which is Bone Button Borscht. As some of you may recall, we actually read this a few weeks ago. I'm also going to include the read aloud above for this text as well in case you didn't read it. And even if you did read it and you don't really remember what happened, it's a good idea to refresh your memory. So make sure that you are watching the read aloud for these books above if you did not read either of them, and then feel free to watch it even if you did read them just to refresh your memory, which is always a great idea. And the reason that we're going to be using bold text today is because our skill of the day is comparing and contrasting story versions from different authors. So comparing and contrasting is looking how things are similar and different. So I don't know if you guys noticed when we were reading Stone Soup yesterday, but this book is very similar to the other book that we read earlier, which is Bone Button Borscht. They both have very similar problems, solutions, even their characters are somewhat alike. So today we are going to be comparing them and looking at how they are the same. So here are our steps. Step 1 was what is each story about? Step 2, compare and contrast story elements. Step 3, how are the stories similar or different? And today we are actually just going to be focusing on comparing or looking at how the stories are the same. So I'm going to show you how I follow my steps doing that, and then your only job after that is to answer the Google Classroom question. So I'm really excited to get into it with you guys. So step number 1, what is each story about? So I'll start us off with Stone Soup, which is the story that we just read yesterday. Remember, this story is all about 3 soldiers who come into a small town looking for food and shelter. They are turned away by the townspeople at first, but then after offering to make stone soup, all the townspeople come together, make this soup, and feed the soldiers and give them a place to stay. And then looking at Bone Button Borscht, this story is all about a beggar who comes into a small town looking for food and shelter. He is turned away at first by the townspeople, but then when he convinces them that he can make this magical bone button borscht, the people come together to make this borscht with him. And then they end up feasting together, and he has a place to stay, and he stays with them and feeds them, and he leaves a hero. Going into step 2, compare story elements. Remember, we are only focusing on the comparing today. So we're going to be looking at how these story elements are the same. So the 3 story elements we'll look at is the main characters, the setting, and important events. So looking first at Stone Soup, we're going to look at our characters. Our main characters, again, are our 3 soldiers. And then when we look at Bone Button Borscht, we know that our main character is the beggar. So here we see that they're different here, right? They're not exactly the same. So we can say that for the main characters that they're different because here we have 3 men and here we have 1 beggar. Next, let's compare the setting in the text. So the setting in the text, of course, is where the story takes place. So in Stone Soup, it says that they come to a small town. We don't know the name of the small town, but we know that they arrive at this small town and they stay at this small town the entire time in the story. So that's where the story takes place, this small town. And then we actually have the exact same setting for Bone Button Borscht. It also takes place in a small town. The beggar arrives in this small town. There's not a lot of people there. Or there are people, but they're hiding. So there's not people on the streets. So it also takes place in a small town. The beggar spends the entire story at this small town. He doesn't go anywhere else in the story. So the setting is the exact same for both texts. And then the last story element we're going to look at is important events. So remember, important events in the story are what the character wants, the problem, solution, things like that. So looking at what both the main characters want, we have our three soldiers and we have our beggar. And what the characters want in the problem is actually the same in both texts, because both the three soldiers and the beggar want food and they want a place to stay. But the problem is the townsfolk in these small towns are not willing to give them a place to stay. So we see that in Bone Button Borscht, we have our characters that are, or the townsfolk that are not opening the doors for the beggar. They say they don't have any food. It's hard for them to share. They are not even willing to open the door for him. And then we have here in Stone Soup, the people do have food. They do have food, but they choose not to share it. So the stories are a tiny bit different in that the beggar does, the townsfolk in Stone Soup do have food, but they don't want to share it. Whereas in Bone Button Borscht, they don't have food. But in Stone Soup, they do have food. However, both texts they don't want to share. So that's how they're similar. That's how we can compare them. And then the solution is actually very similar as well, in that the people by the end are feasting together, including the main characters and the townsfolk. And then it's the same thing in Bone Button Borscht. By the end, everyone is friendly with each other. They're sharing. They're loving. So the problem, the solution, and the setting are very similar, where the characters are different. So now going into step 3, how are the stories similar? Remember, today we are only focusing on how they are similar. So these stories are similar in that they have similar problem and solutions, and they're especially similar in that they have the same setting, right? They take place in a small unknown town. So exact same setting and very similar problem and solution. All right, friends, now you guys are going to scroll down and answer our question. I know you guys are going to do a great job. Sorry. All right, friends, here's our question today. Looking at both of our texts, how are Stone Soup and Bone Button Borscht similar? A, both texts have the exact same characters. B, both texts have the same narrator. C, both texts have the same setting. D, both texts have the same illustrations. All right, friends, great job, and I'll see you guys tomorrow. Whoops.